Good evening, Tanse, and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Water problems are a standing issue for the city of Iqaluit. Nunavut's capital has been plagued by contaminated water, and now a long-running water shortage has Iqaluit back in a state of emergency. Our Kent Driscoll reports a fix is planned and funded. For now, Iqaluit waits.
The city of Iqaluit is called a local state of emergency over water availability. The reservoir is low. Again.
We won't have enough water throughout the winter if we don't do this pumping. So it's just a matter of the fact that we haven't had that much. We didn't have very much snow this year, and other than the last 3 days, we really haven't had that much rain.
If that sounds familiar, it should. Iqaluit's water shortage bubbles up annually. In 2017, the city banned washing cars to conserve water. In 2019, a state of emergency, just like this one, was called to allow for more pumping from the Apex River and a nearby lake. Why is Iqaluit calling states of emergency for an ongoing problem? The mayor says they're just trying to keep their heads above water.
Although the thaw happens, we start pumping from Apex River into Lake Geraldine. And typically, every year for the last 6 years, other than 2019 and this year, have been enough to fill the dam because of the runoff. Now, if you go up to Apex River right now, it's basically trickling. There's not enough water coming through the Apex River.
The water shortage has a trickle-down effect on the city. Not enough water means you can't build new housing. No new housing means that some jobs are going unfilled in Iqaluit. The city could be flooded with growth, with enough water.
We could probably double in size in the next 5 to 10 years if we had the houses. And the number one reason why we don't have a new subdivision is because of the water supply.
Iqaluit's previous water crisis, when fuel contaminated the water late last year, resulted in over $200 million in funding to replace large parts of the water delivery system and to increase the size of the reservoir. That process will take years. For now, it's sink or swim for Iqaluit, with emergency measures as a life raft to await the eventual new water system. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
The Trudeau government announced a new initiative Tuesday. It's to address the nursing shortage in rural and remote Indigenous communities. The government is investing about $800,000 to increase recruitment and retention allowances. But will it be enough to fix the problem? APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
With the challenges that living through a global pandemic has presented to countries around the world, Canada, like many other countries, has struggled to support those hardworking healthcare providers across the country.
That's Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu talking about what has become a serious national nursing shortage. ISC employs roughly 840 nurses, which includes staffing 50 remote communities. And department official Layla Gillis says there is a big hole to fill.
We do have a significant vacancy rate right now. My estimates are, to address the immediate needs within nursing stations, we would require up to 150 nurses to fill the needs for our operations in the north.
Tuesday's announcement triples recruitment and retention allowances. A nurse working in one of these communities could see an increase of as much as $20,000 per year in benefits. Hajdu says it won't end the crisis, but it's a start.
So it's not one solution. It really is multiple solutions that will, create a longer-term, more stable healthcare workforce in particular. But I think today's announcement is about recognizing just how precious and valuable those services are in the context of remote communities and doing everything we can to keep those people that have chosen to practice in remote communities and to entice new people.
Gillis says seriously tackling the national nursing shortage will take a coordinated federal and provincial approach.
A crisis like this in the Canadian healthcare system requires multi-jurisdictional collaboration in regards to finding solutions. And a part of that, as you raise, is about building the nursing workforce over time.
And Jennifer Carr of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada says governments need to look at why so many nurses have stopped practicing.
There are 15,000 registered nurses right now who are not practicing, and that has to be looked into because there are people who have left the profession because they have felt burnt out, stressed out, they're not feeling love from their employer, and we really have to get to those root causes.
The changes are slated to take effect September 1st. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
An investigation into how a Blackfoot man died in Calgary police custody has been concluded. Sonny Crazy Bull died in his holding cell in October 2020. An autopsy revealed substance use led to his death. APTN's Tamara Pimentel has the details.
Sonny Crazy Bull was last seen at this C train station before being taken into Calgary police custody. In October 2020, the 41-year-old was arrested following reports of a man in possession of an airsoft gun and charged with breach-related offenses. That arrest ultimately led to his death. His mother, Shelley Crazy Bull, spoke with APTN News 1 year after her son died.
I couldn't believe it. It was very unbelievable. That night, when the police came, things haven't been the same for me.
Now, nearly 2 years later, an investigation by the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team determined substance use is the cause of death. A report from ACERT revealed, in video recorded in Sonny's holding cell, he was seen eating a sandwich provided to him while holding something in the palm of his hand. He was then seen raising that hand to his mouth, apparently ingesting something. Then he discarded something into the toilet and flushed it. Sonny was later found unresponsive. Medical staff were called to provide emergency first aid. They were unable to revive him. An autopsy determined the immediate cause of death to be ethanol, fentanyl, and methamphetamine toxicity. Shelley wasn't available for an updated interview, but told us Sonny was committed to his family.
My son, he was so a gentleman. He was loving, caring. He was a kind person.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Staggering new figures have been released today by British Columbia's Coroner Service concerning drug deaths in the province. They show that between January and June of this year, 1,095 BC residents lost their lives to toxic drugs. The figure is higher than the same 6-month period last year, putting the province on a record pace. The Coroner's Service also announced that more than 10,000 British Columbians have died since a public health emergency was declared in 2016. Lisa Lapointe is BC's chief coroner.
I think the message really can only be it's unpredictable. We are buying from an illicit market, and as Guy pointed out, it is an organized crime market. It is not focused on keeping people well. It is focused on profit. And as long as we have that market as the only source where people can get the drug that they need, we'll continue to see the fluidity in the deaths and the high numbers of deaths.
In June, Ottawa approved a 3-year exception to federal drug laws, and from next year, BC will become the first province where people won't be arrested or charged for possessing up to 2.5 grams of certain illicit drugs. A proposed gondola project in the city of Edmonton has been grounded because of the potential to disturb a historic Indigenous burial ground. The project was slated to be up and running by 2025, but Edmonton City Council shut down the idea on Monday night. For more, we're joined by our Danielle Paradis, who has been covering the story. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hi, Daryl. Happy to be here.
So can you tell us a bit about what this project would have looked like?
Sure. So the gondola project was supposed to be 5 stations with 19 columns that stretch across the river valley. It was a 2.5-kilometer stretch from some historic sites such as the Rossdale power plant, as well as the steel plant across the river in Edmonton's White Avenue neighborhood. So it was the plan was to connect downtown with the other side of the river in Edmonton.
So what can you tell us about the burial site in question here?
Yeah, the burial site has been a conversation since the 1970s. So previous to that, there was the Flats, which was a very important trading station, as well as a ceremonial site for Indigenous communities. There was the last Sundance in the city was held in that place, and there's also a burial site as well. So the burial site has multiple layers of remains stretching back. I've heard activity as early as like 12,000 years ago, but more recently there were both early settlers and Indigenous people buried in that site.
Did the gondola idea have some Indigenous support?
Yes, there was some support. The former chief of the Alexis Nakota Sioux First Nation and now the CEO of Tribal Chief Ventures spoke in support. There was some support from the Papachase First Nation, although there was also opposition from the Papachase Papeo First Nations acting chief George Quinn. So it was very much a mixed response from the Indigenous community.
So Danielle, what were some of the concerns that eventually led to the grounding of the project?
Yeah, Councillor Aaron Paquette, the only Indigenous member of City Council, referred to the initial stages of the Prairie Sky Gondola consultations with Indigenous communities as a manufactured consent. So his concern was that the organization went looking specifically for people that would agree with them and stayed away from the more critical voices. And I think we saw that come out at the city council meetings themselves when there were over 50 people initially lined up to speak, and they all had various opinions. But what we heard over and over again from Indigenous community members was that they felt, the ones that spoke in opposition felt that this was not an appropriate use for this sacred site.
All right, Danielle, we'll have to leave it there. We certainly appreciate your insight into this. You can read more on the story on our website, aptnnews.ca. Thank you again, Danielle.
Thank you.
All right, it's time for a short break, but still ahead, a new special report by the Yellowhead Institute looks at Indigenous relations at Canada's Big Five banks. Welcome back. After 50 years, the Academy of Motion Pictures is finally apologizing to Sasheen Littlefeather for the treatment she received at the 1973 Oscars. Littlefeather was the first Indigenous woman to stand on stage at the Academy Awards, representing Marlon Brando after he was named winner of Best Actor for The Godfather. Littlefeather accepted, or rather rejected, the award on Brando's behalf.
Hello, my name is Sasheen Littlefeather. I'm Apache, and I'm president of the National Native American Affirmative Image Committee. I'm representing Marlon Brando this evening, and he has asked me to tell you in a very long speech, which I cannot share with you presently because of time, but I will be glad to share with the press afterwards, that he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award. And the reasons for this being are the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry, and on television in movie reruns, and also with recent happenings at Wounded Knee.
Littlefeather was harassed and professionally boycotted for the speech. In a statement, Littlefeather said of the Academy's apology, quote, "We Indians are very patient people. It's only been 50 years, end quote. The Academy Museum of Motion Pictures will hold an evening with Sasheen Littlefeather on September 17th in Los Angeles, calling it a celebration of healing and reflection where the apology will be officially presented. A new special report by the Yellowhead Institute looks at Indigenous relations at Canada's Big Five banks. The report, Redwashing Extraction, was written by Robert Houle. We spoke with him earlier in the week. Robert, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Can you tell us why you wanted to take a deep dive into the role the Big Five banks in Canada are planning when it comes to Indigenous relations?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of upheaval and a lot of issues around resource extraction, development projects, things like that across the country. And we have to remember that at the back end of all of these projects, there is money and financing supporting their ongoing land disturbances and things like that, and the impacts on Indigenous communities. So I wanted to parallel that with what the work that the banks are doing to build relationships with Indigenous communities, and whether or not it's meeting what they're investing or whether or not there's a disparity. And I think the report speaks for itself.
Now, your report is called Redwashing Extraction. Can you tell us about that title and why that title?
Yeah, so we've seen in my work with the Yellowhead Institute, we've seen a lot of conversations around this notion of greenwashing, which is how resource companies, industrial bodies, banks, governments do a lot of investing into climate initiatives, green energy, all of these other kind of fringe pushing initiatives, yet they're conflicting with what they're really doing in the back rooms and with other dealings and things like that. And what we wanted to highlight is that the same kind of issue is happening with Indigenous communities, that we're seeing a lot of piecemeal investments, we're seeing a lot of partnerships that are very superficial in nature. They're bringing on advisory bodies and things like that with Indigenous representation, but on the ground we're not seeing much of a difference, and really the investment lacks when regarding Indigenous relations and building meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities.
So, Robert, how are banks interpreting Indigenous rights in the era of reconciliation?
Well, as I go through in the report, they're very reliant on international measures and other kind of mechanisms, for instance, the Equator Principles, but the Equator Principles fall short in a sense that they point to a firm definition of free, prior, informed consent not existing, when in fact we know that Indigenous communities have been clear on what free, prior, informed consent means, yet the banks and other companies rely on that superficial, that watered down definition to kind of support their ongoing infractions on Indigenous rights, which we know are happening. And you just have to look at the news headlines and watch the national news and things like that to see where these conflicts are taking place and realize that there's a real problem happening.
So what role do you think divestment movements have had on the banks? And in recent years, that has been a lot of momentum on getting the banks to divest from certain industries or projects.
Well, I think we've seen a lot of some success in terms of divesting from coal, for instance, and other really, really harmful and impactful industries for green energy kind of specific focus. But in terms of Indigenous relations, Indigenous land violations, things like that, we're still seeing those kind of conflicts ongoing. So there may be divestment in other areas, but there seems to be an increased investment in other industries, and that not only does that continue to do harm, but it may even do more harm, as we're seeing with the ongoing Trans Mountain expansion and other projects like that, where we're seeing salmon run being interrupted and other things. Even though they've divested from other industries, they may be increasing their investment in other areas.
And lastly here, Robert, what do you hope people take away from this report?
Well, I think individual Canadians, individual Indigenous people really think about what role the banks play, how their money, their own investments in the banks, what role they're playing as well, and whether or not they can push their leadership to make some different choices, some advocacy positions. When you look at the banks and some of their various advocacy bodies and advisory bodies, there are chiefs and leaders sitting on those bodies, giving them some sort of legitimacy. I think it's time for grassroots people, for regular Indigenous people, to really question the role that those bodies play and whether or not they're doing more harm than good.
All right, certainly a lot to think about there, Robert. We do have to leave it there, so we'll have to let you go, but certainly appreciate all your insight on this.
No, thank you for the opportunity and happy to be here.
It's time for one final commercial break. Stay with us. Our photo of the day and weather are next. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. August 11th was the last supermoon event for the year, and Joe Savatis was able to get this photo of what that looked like over the community of Kingsclear First Nation in New Brunswick. Amazing shot, Joe, and thank you for sharing. You can submit your photos by email to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Beginning on the East Coast, rain in 21 in Charlottetown and 17 in rain in St. John's. 27 and clear in Cartwright and 28 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 24 degrees in Quebec City and 25 in Gas Bay. 24 in rain in London and 26 in rain in Sault Ste. Marie. 25 and clear in Wawa and 19 in Thunder Bay. Showers in 27 in Churchill, and showers in 29 in Norway House. Mix of sun and cloud in 26 in Barons River, and 27 in Gimli. 27 in Estevan, and 28 in Saskatoon. 25 in showers in La Ronge, and 27 in showers in Stony Rapids. Moving further west, to clear in 28 in High Level, and 28 in Peace River. 27 and sun in Edmonton, and sunny in 27 in Calgary. 27 in Vancouver, and 30 degrees in Bella Coola. 22 and some showers in Sandspit, and 28 in Fort Nelson. Some showers, and 18 in Beaver Creek, and 20 in Old Crow. 28 in Fort Simpson, and 28 in Fort Liard. 21 degrees in Fort McPherson, and 21 in Inuvik. 27 degrees in Chesterfield, and 10 degrees in Cambridge Bay. 2 degrees in Resolute, and 10 degrees in Iqaluit. Team Canada has finished on top of Group A at the World Junior Hockey Championship.
Picks off that pass. It's Savage in, shoots, scores!
Canada sealed it with an empty netter, beating Finland 6-3 in Edmonton to wrap up the preliminary round. Team Canada built up a 5-1 lead before Finland scored twice. Canada moves on to the quarterfinals and will face Switzerland tomorrow. It was 45 years ago today when Elvis Presley passed away.
There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. Got to be birds flying.
Widely regarded as the king of rock and roll, Presley died on this day in 1977 at the age of 42. All right, that is all we have for you this evening on APTN National News. As always, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, for more Indigenous news. I'm Daryl Stranger. For all of us here, thank you for joining us. Miigwech, and have a great night.